Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Frost. I'm one of the coordinators of the National Planning Webcast Series Consortium. I'm also the Professional Development Officer for the Northern New England chapter of the APA, which is one of the members and sponsors of the Planning Webcast Series Consortium. Today is Friday, May 29th, 2015, and we'll hear the presentation, Technology Applications for Transportation Planning. So for help during today's webcast, you can type a question in the question box on your GoToWebinar menu, or you can call the toll-free number here, 1-800-263-6317 for tech support at GoToWebinar. If it is a serious technical problem, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. I can try to help you with very basic things. For content-related questions related to the presentations today, please type those questions in the question box, also located on the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen. We'll answer those questions as time allows at the end of the presentations during our Q&A session. On your screen now is a list of the sponsoring chapters and divisions. I want to take this time to thank all of the participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and making them free to all of your members. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Transportation Planning Division of APA. To learn more about all of the chapters, visit the link shown at the bottom of the screen, and to learn about all divisions, including the Transportation Planning Division, and to become a member, click on the link there, www.planning.org/divisions. Here on your screen now is a list of some upcoming webcasts. In fact, the slate of webcasts is pretty much complete for the entire year now. We have almost every Friday booked, which is really a great thing. So this is just a few of the webcasts that are coming up in the next month or so. Note in particular the June 12th webcast, which is new, sponsored by the Colorado chapter, Placemaking Advanced Techniques for Programming and Design. And registration for that will be online very shortly. To log your CM credits, remember, go to your APA dashboard, select Activities by Provider. For today's webcast, select Transportation Planning Division and select this title, or you can also search by the event number E30331. This webcast has been approved for 1.5 AICP CM credits for live viewing only. You can like us on Facebook, and we do get a lot of likes every day. And through Facebook, you can receive up-to-date information on the Webcast Series Consortium and upcoming webcasts. To view videos, recordings of all the webcasts, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, or you can just follow this link where all of the webcasts that we record are posted. If you want to see the PDFs of the presentations today, go to the Ohio Planning webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And note, this is our new website for all of the webcasts. I'm going to introduce our speakers today, starting with Brandon Cox. Brandon is the Senior Director of Rehabilitation and Education Services and a Certified Orientation and Mobility Specialist with the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind in Washington, D.C. He's the President-elect of the D.C., Maryland chapter of the Association for Education and Rehabilitation of the Blind and Visually Impaired, and a member of the Alexandria Commission for People with Disabilities, the Maryland Governor's Office of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Deaf-Blind Subcommittee, and is a trainer with the ADA Leadership Network. He has his BA in International Studies and Russian Language from Baylor University and his MA from University of Arkansas, Little Rock in blind rehabilitation. Our second speaker will be Brett Fusco, who's a Senior Transportation Planner in the Office of Long-Range Planning and Economic Coordination at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. In this position, he has worked on several versions of Greater Philadelphia's long-range plan, most recently Connections 2040. His chief professional interest is to use transportation investments to help create healthy, accessible, competitive, and sustainable communities. He holds a BA in mathematics from the Wichita State University and a master's degree in urban planning from the University of Pennsylvania. Our final speaker will be Greg Griffin, who is a researcher in the Austin office of the Texas A&M Transportation Institute, following over a decade of experience in public and private sector planning and geographic information systems. Currently, he is leading a study of real-time ride-sharing technology with tolling discounts and developing new methods to assess active transportation. He is also pursuing a PhD in community and regional planning at the University of Texas at Austin. He began his planning career with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and also worked in the private sector as a site planner and geographic information systems analyst and project manager. So Brandon, I'm going to turn the screen over to you and you can start your presentation.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brandon Cox. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I have a lot of information to cover, so hang on for a quick ride. So today I'm going to be speaking on accessible wayfinding for the disabled traveler, and specifically on a case study of what we've done in the DC Metro Wayfinding Project. It's a collaboration between Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, and Click and Go Wayfinding Maps. CLB initially started this project back in 2013, where we submitted grant funding just to consider recording audio maps on the Metro. My background as an orientation mobility instructor, we would receive phone calls from individuals who we had already trained to use the Metro system to ask us, hey, I'm going to an unfamiliar station that I've never been to before. Can you describe it for me? Can you tell me how to get out of it? Can you tell me what's outside and around it? So the initial grant process was just around walking into a station and recording descriptions of the stations. So that's kind of the background of the DC Metro project, and it's really ballooned into many other things. We received the initial grant funding for phase one of the demonstration project. We received $100,000 through New Freedom funding through the FTA. Which that program has now been changed to the Enhanced Mobility Program. And I started doing research to determine how we were actually going to accomplish these deliverables. And at the time, I found Click and Go Wayfinding Maps and their CEO, Joe Chaffee. Joe's background, he's had 36 years of experience as a deafblind orientation mobility instructor. And he also had a long-standing tactile graphics and tactile mapping company. That's kind of how he originally started. And eventually he ended up creating Click and Go Wayfinding Maps that started out for just deafblind individuals, and now it's ballooned out to a universal access solution. So there's 91 stations in the DC Metro system. We started our project in 2013 to focus on demonstrating the basic use of Click and Go's technology in 10 of the major metro stations in the area. We completed virtual tours in 10 of the stations, which included descriptions of each entrance and a description of each station, you know, where the exits are and all those type of things. Gallery Place Chinatown, we did a little more, which is we think the most complicated station in the system. It has multiple exits, it's a transfer station, and many different points of interest outside of the station. So in that station, we completed virtual tours as well as 110 point-to-point routes into and out of the station. So that includes from platform to platform, to bus stops outside of the station, to area landmarks like the art gallery. Most of the information is found at the website at clb.org/clickandgo, and I actually need to fix that. That's an error. It should be CLICKANDGO. And there's also an iPhone application. The Android application will be coming out within this year. So phase one was completed as a demonstration in December 2014. And we received an additional phase two demonstration funding through the Enhanced Mobility Program, the FTA, of $250,000 to start implementing some additional aspects of Click and Go, which they've developed actually over the past year or two. So we'll be starting this as soon as the federal government releases our funds for the project, and hopefully we'll have it done by the end of December 2015. We're going to focus on 5 of the 7 stations that we've already touched, and we'll be including more advanced virtual tours, routes into and out of the station, for all the other stations besides Gallery Place. And each one of those routes will have a high-resolution, low-vision map for each route for low-vision travelers who would not need the information in narrative format. And then the best part, the most exciting part, is we're going to be adding iBeacon navigation support. You'll see examples of iBeacons in other places being used, like the San Francisco Airport, the London Tube, organizations called Indoors and Wayfinder. But at this point, they are only using iBeacons for landmarking information. No one is doing what Click and Go has done at this point in actually creating narrative routes for people to travel. And then the iBeacons just serve as support, as confirmation that you're at a landmark. So this next slide is on how does a person who's blind or visually impaired actually travel? The first way is for them to go in and kind of figure out things for themselves. We call it self-orientation. And that's a lot of trial and error, just walking around and exploring. The second is if someone gives you directions or provides you a physical guide support. That would be holding onto someone's arm or something like that, or someone telling you, how to get from one corner to the next, or which streets you should be crossing. The third aspect, and the professional aspect, is orientation and mobility training, which is what my background is in. We teach people to use the white cane and to travel independently in familiar and unfamiliar areas, including on mass transit. But we cannot provide maps for every individual, for every environment that they may be traveling in. You and I can use Google Maps anytime we want to know the directions for driving. And there's even pedestrian directions on Google Maps, but there's no guarantee that that information is going to be available in an accessible format to ensure, is there even a sidewalk there that I'm going to be traveling down? There have been some other technologies that have been developed specifically for blind travelers, like the Trek or Breeze GPS system and other types of technology. All of those have not really done extremely well because the blind population is only 1% of the population, and these devices were very expensive. And they didn't always work because they were GPS oriented. So whenever it was a cloudy day, you wouldn't get as much support that you needed. And also, it didn't allow for indoor wayfinding, which is really a hot topic among major venues and planners like yourselves. The fifth aspect is tactile maps. Tactile maps are large stationary maps where an individual can explore with their hands and determine how an area is arranged. But in order for someone to have a tactile map for every location, it would be like carrying a huge trunk around with you, or having to search for it in whatever location you were in, like a metro station would have to have a stationary map like this in every station, which is not really cost effective, and it is a waste of space. There's not a lot of use for them. So the great thing about Click and Go is it's a searchable, customized data in a manual pre-compiled website or database. And that's a little bit confusing, but basically an orientation mobility specialist at this point will go in and record information in a narrative format to describe an area or to describe a route for a person to travel using the type of information that a blind person needs, and to ensure that they can receive it in the format that they use it, whether it's an MP3, whether it's text, so that they can read it through a Braille display, or using more high-tech smartphone capabilities for the iPhone application. These narratives include information like slope, sound, tactile, and distance cues. And it's available for multiple user groups. So you can create a profile for an individual who is blind, who uses a cane, who uses a guide dog, an individual who's a wheelchair user who has full vision. And we've even found that this is useful for people who use other languages or may have some sort of print disability. There's many different things. It's really a universal access material. And the most important thing about this is it's free to users. There's no equipment needed to purchase outside of the small and expensive iBeacons. And installation and maintenance is very minor on the iBeacon front. So someone can walk in without the iBeacons in a location and still use this system with their own device. The data is delivered through multiple formats. Smartphone is obviously the best way to receive it. The Click and Go system allows for seamless outdoor to indoor transitioning, which is not available really anywhere else, describing the actual features as you're going into a location or venue. And that is supported by iBeacon technology to understand the landmarking aspects. For a person who is blind, it's very important for someone to know how to journey, to have pre-journey learning, which means they listen to this before they even leave their house. It would be like you looking at a Google map before you took off on your trip. It's deliverable in multiple languages. It's available in interactive voice response through just a regular phone. And we have low vision, high contrast maps for low vision users, and there can be a separate database for wheelchair users. This is an example of the different databases. You have your typical pedestrians, just visitors coming, tourists, a database for individuals who are blind cane users, and stare-free directions. I already talked a little bit about how the data is compiled, but right now it's all manually done and entered. The data is entered into a database. It's searchable and available through all different formats that an individual might need it. The venues typically will pay for this type of service to be provided. So that's why transit systems across the country are looking at this now. We've looked at museums, higher education, many other places. The blind community really likes this. Both all sides of it. National Federation of the Blind and the American Council for the Blind have all been supportive of this, which is actually fairly rare. So it's available by people using their screen reader, interactive voice response, text or MP3, large print or braille. They could actually just print it out. Refreshable braille for someone who is deaf-blind, and the iPhone application. Here's an example of what the website looks like. I would definitely encourage you to go to our actual website and explore it. So the different features, we have accessible walking directions that provide routes from one point to another. Here's a nice graphic of kind of explaining how we would describe it. And you can go back and look at these slides later on when we have more time. We also provide low vision maps to go along with each route. And here's an example of one of those. These are very important for someone who has low vision, who may still be living in a visual environment, but they may not be able to see a cluttered map. So the virtual tours provide an overview or a walkthrough of a venue to allow someone to familiarize themselves to a location and create a cognitive map. The points of interest provide descriptions of landmarks, the basics of what you would typically get when you were doing something online with some other type of equipment. Another great thing is it allows for intersection descriptions, the geometry and the traffic controls of an intersection. And because for someone to stand and listen to a complicated intersection, it could take them half an hour or an hour to really understand how the traffic is going to be moving. But if you can walk up and get an explanation immediately, it's going to save the traveler time. There's other great things about this, like restaurants can use it for menu access, and also emergency evacuation and egress is a major piece of what we're attempting to do. We're actually starting a separate research project in the Metro working on the use of these beacons and this type of technology for emergency egress. The iBeacon support is going to provide real-time location support. It can identify hazards, landmarks, and iBeacons are really going to be a part of many of our lives. When you pass a Starbucks, it's going to send you an ad letting you know, hey, come in and get your favorite drink at a discounted price. So we're taking something that's being used for marketing purposes and using it for real wayfinding that's going to make an impact on society. Here's an example of a narrative without an iBeacon, and here's an example of what the beacons would provide. So when you get within about 20 feet of it, it would send you a text message, and you would receive that either through a refreshable braille display or a headset that would allow the person to know what they are near. And it provides confirmation that you're traveling on the route appropriately. Here's another example in the station. Here's the different areas that this technology is going to be great use in. It's already being used in many of these locations across the United States, and most of the mass transit organizations are interested in it. DC, we're very proud that we're the ones who have been able to start with Click and Go and mass transit first. So that's the basics of what our project looks like. We're hoping that at the end of phase 2 that we will be able to convince the transit community here to fund the service and the rest of the system, all 91 stations. The cost is actually very minimal whenever you look at lighting upgrades and things like that that would have to be done in order to really take care of many of the issues that this provides information on. I'm going to go ahead and skip to the end because I know that we need to move on to Brett, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Please go to the website, both clickandgomaps.com and then the specific clb.org/clickandgo for our project to really learn more about what we're doing. It's very exciting, and we're very pleased to be a part of it. So thank you for your time, and I'm going to turn it over to Brett.
And Brett, as you're getting your presentation ready, this is a good time to remind everyone to, if you have questions, write them into the question box so that when we get to the end of the presentations, we'll have questions for our presenters.
All right, thank you, Ben, and also thank you, Brandon, for the fascinating presentation. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're in, to those who are listening today. My name is Brett Fusco. I'm with the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. I'm here to talk to you about choices and voices, and a lot of you probably are wondering what is choices and voices besides the obvious. It's two nouns that rhyme. It's an online scenario tool that builds off the considerable scenario analysis that DVRPC has conducted over the past decade plus. We found scenario planning is a really useful tool for collaboration, collective learning, involving stakeholders, and then identifying a more desirable future as part of our long-range planning process. Just a quick agenda overview of what we're going to talk about today. Talk about who DVRPC is, how the Choices and Voices program operates, how we developed it, how we spread word about it, some of the findings, and then where we're going with it next. So the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission is the metropolitan planning organization for Greater Philadelphia. We serve a bi-state region of 9 counties. You see over 350 municipalities, each of which have, both of our states are home rule, which means they have control over their land use decisions, and there's a lot of local governments coordinated with. So those are some of the challenges within our region. We're also a relatively low growth region, projecting 11% population employment growth out to the year 2040. And as a metropolitan planning organization, DVRPC must develop a long-range plan that identifies a regional vision for future growth and development and creates a fiscally constrained blueprint for transportation investments with a minimum 20-year horizon. So Choices and Voices as a tool extends our public outreach around both of these requirements. Choices and Voices is intended to be a form of participatory democracy targeted to the general public. It investigates, if we do this, what is the impact? It uses real and model data, and upon completion, we hope that individuals have a better understanding of the challenges facing the region's transportation system and have the opportunity to voice their opinions on preferred future development patterns, investments, and the type of projects implemented. It strives to be quick and easy to complete while being relevant, interesting, and educational to citizens throughout Greater Philadelphia. It was first launched in October 2012 as part of the update to our current long-range plan, Connections 2040. The current version is actually its third iteration. Version 2.1 was launched about 1 year ago and accounts for increased state transportation funding in Pennsylvania as a result of Act 89. You can access Choices and Voices through the web link shown here on this slide. And so after launching Choices and Voices, there's a brief intro page that gives basic information about the tool's operation. The program is then comprised of 3 separate components that help to walk the user through the long-range planning process. The first component considers what kind of development patterns the user would like to see in the region, one with transportation options or one where you'd primarily drive everywhere. This goes on to serve as a visual preferences survey and shows the links between land use and transportation, which you can see through the impact on a number of indicators in the dark blue box on the right side of the screen. The second component lays out the case for more local funding in the region and asks the participant if they agree that it's necessary. And you can say no here, but if you say yes, the additional revenue you identify will be added to our reasonably anticipated forecast for the region and can be invested in additional transportation projects in the next part of the program. It also shows how different taxes and fees could impact transportation patterns and use, again, using the set of indicators on the right. So those who do say yes go on to be asked 2 more questions. What should the funding source be, and what amount should an average household pay? Then the third component builds a long-range financial plan for transportation infrastructure. And this is based on the in-depth needs assessment that DVRPC conducts for each long-range plan update. The first in a series of questions asks about how much should we spend on road and bridge maintenance. The second question asks about transit maintenance, and again uses our long-range plan needs assessment data. This section goes on to consider investments in operational improvements, system expansion, and bicycle and pedestrian projects. Upon completion of the main part of the program, the final page summarizes the results of the user's scenario, uses storyboards to further elaborate on it, and short summaries of each indicator that gives more information about the likely outcomes. A crowdsourced everyone's scenario allows for quick comparison to the average of all scenarios submitted to date. And as part of DVRPC's attempt to foster online dialogue about the region's vision for the future, the responses to the previous versions and all comments received are summarized in a PDF that can be found on the Choices and Voices launch page. So Choices and Voices builds off previous DVRPC scenario analysis. These are our 2 scenario reports that focus heavily on land use. They were modeled using the U-Plan model that was developed by the University of California, Davis. The first one of those was called Making the Land Use Connection. It was developed to guide the update to our previous long-range plan, which was simply entitled Connections. This report, Making Land Use Connection, was used as a discussion piece in our public outreach and to identify a preferred land use vision. It incorporated 2 extreme settlement patterns, a recentralization of population back into the region's core, and sprawl, which focused most growth on the region's fringes, and even continued the long-term trend of population moving from the core to the outer parts of the region. Both of those were compared to our expected trend scenario, and it was used to understand different impacts to land use, transportation, the environment, and economic competitiveness. And the result of this effort in public discussion was the identification of a preference for the recentralization scenario, but not quite at the extreme density level it featured. So the resulting plan scenario was modeled in implementing connections, which went on to quantify the benefits of implementing the policies and achieving the goals set forth in the connections plan. This is just a quick visualization of the U-Plan outputs in terms of new footprint of acres developed in each of the 3 scenarios. As you can imagine, the sprawl scenario went on to feature a lot more driving. The recentralization scenario featured a lot more alternative transportation trips. The next scenario analysis we used to build into Choices and Voices was called the Transportation Investment Scenarios. And this report was used to guide the development of our current long-range plan, Connections 2040. And it recognized that the region's transportation funding system was a critical issue, particularly in Pennsylvania, and made this the focal point of the resulting plan. Anyone who's followed the transportation funding situation in the country has probably heard Pennsylvania leads the nation in structurally deficient and functionally obsolete bridges. So that was one of the big issues we wanted to focus on. And so this report looked at actual federal funding proposals that were put forth in the lead up to the adoption of MAP 21, and looked at future infrastructure condition and what projects we could afford to do and not do under high, medium, and low funding scenarios. And one of the things I think we did really well in this report was to point to short-term and medium-term outcomes, rather than focusing everything on a future that was 25 years away and then starts to suffer from the so what response. So peeking behind the scenes on choices and voices, we used a regional transit score to link land use patterns of transportation demand. You can see how transit trips varied, looking at the land use patterns for these different scenarios in the land use reports. And transit score is a joint effort from DVRPC and New Jersey Transit. And what it really does is identify the highest level of transit service an area can support based on existing density patterns. And we modified that to work within our land use patterns being developed in these different scenario analysis. And so, what we strive to do in developing choices and voices is create a series of relationship equations, very simply using Excel, that became the basis of how different things change under different development patterns and different options we choose within the model itself. And we also see this effort as part of an open data platform, in that it gives the public better access to some of our travel demand modeling and outcomes, results, and findings. Another thing behind the scenes in choices and voices is we use just standard transportation elasticities to estimate how different types and levels of funding would affect travel demand. So this table is just showing some of the different elasticities that we use to model travel demand changes from increasing taxes and fees. So Choices and Voices was originally set up in an Excel spreadsheet and then programmed in-house using HTML5, as well as a few open source plugins such as Bootstrap and Knockout. And we really aim to use creative visualizations and keep it simple to use and simple to understand. So it's a text-like program using graphics to illustrate concepts, and condense additional information using pop-up windows. I'd say probably our biggest challenge from Choices and Voices is just getting the word out. As a public agency, we have pretty much a zero or maybe even a negative budget for advertising. So we really tried to spread the word through word of mouth, through guerrilla marketing, using social media, the DVRPC website itself. We were fortunate to have a few news articles pick up and talk about the program when it was first launched. But that's certainly been the biggest challenge, is not only getting word out, but keeping interest in it over the long term. We have had, since the program's been launched, I mentioned there's been 3 versions. This looks at the number of responses we've gotten and where they've come from. We've got about 365 responses, identifying in zip codes within the DVRPC region. And then looking at all 3 of those so far, that have been completed so far, we have had responses that are much heavier towards, or pointing towards a much denser development pattern than the towns and centers pattern the Connections 2040 plan calls for. And you can see very little suburban development patterns. And so the average of all the scenarios so far would only develop about 15% of the land that's been developed, or 39,000 acres over the next 25 years, compared to what's been developed on average over the last 80 years in the region, which is closer to 10,000 acres per year. And this is one of those things that makes me think we probably have a lot of planners taking Choices and Voices. Looking at the revenue options that people have identified, congestion pricing has surprisingly come out as the top vote getter, which makes me think maybe we're actually having some economists take it as well. Another interesting result is that the no new taxes is only 5% of responses. And given that version 2.1 was launched after the passage of additional funding for transportation in the state of Pennsylvania, I thought it'd be interesting to compare version 1 and 2 when the funding crisis was happening, how much users were averaging for new taxes and fees for households per year, $150. I was expected it to have gone down. It actually went up to $210 per household per year in version 2.1. We use this just to compare at a high level of how well, where our expenditures in the long-range plan are lining up with where Choices and Voices participants are at. Again, I mentioned earlier, those who choose additional funding get it to show up in their pot of allocatable revenue. And so, our average user is working with about $10 billion more than we are in the actual long-range plan. But nevertheless, they're spending less of it on system expansion than we are, more of it on operational improvements and system preservation. We also can track, which transit lines people are including in their scenarios. The Norristown high-speed line is a project that seems to have a lot of legs behind it right now, and that's been the top vote getter in the Choices and Voices application. Our respondents are definitely overweighted towards Pennsylvania. A much higher percent of our respondents have come from the Pennsylvania side of the region than actually, compared to the percent that actually live within the region in Pennsylvania. So I think that's part of what explains why some of the New Jersey projects haven't scored as well in Choices and Voices. And, and a bit of good news, we were really excited to get this email from the Pima Association of Governments a few weeks back to let us know the Choices and Voices family has expanded. You can see their RTP Engage 2045 tool, borrows a lot of the concepts and ideas in Choices and Voices, but certainly adds their own touch to it. And I think a tool like Choices and Voices is very customizable. You develop options and indicators that focus on what you consider to be most important issues in your area. The tool is potentially scalable geographically. It doesn't have to just exist at a regional level. It can be created and used to determine impacts on municipal, corridor, state, even national levels if desired. Pardon me. And tools like Choices and Voices can be created through an organic process, one that starts simply with a few questions centered around just maybe even a single issue. And from there, future updates can add new degrees of sophistication. What is most important is following the Choices and Voices philosophy using a data-driven process to determine what are the outcomes of our decisions and to help us identify priorities. So just to quickly summarize, Choices and Voices allows individuals to create their own vision for the future of Greater Philadelphia. It attempts to create a two-way dialogue between participants who can learn about the long-range planning process and the challenges facing the region, and our regional planners who can garner feedback on preferred development patterns, willingness to pay for additional improvements, and desired transportation investments. Provides 24/7 public participation access, and has allowed us to reach demographic groups such as the millennials that don't come to a lot of MPO public meetings. The Choices and Voices code, along with a companion Excel file that shows how the programs operate, is available on GitHub. We certainly welcome anyone else who wants to try this on their own. It's a chance to innovate within the program itself, and we recognize we can learn from what other agencies do going forward. Just quickly mentioning as well, we're currently working with a group of regional stakeholders, subject matter experts, to identify driving forces of change and how they will impact Greater Philadelphia. And the results of that effort will be incorporated in the next version of Choices and Voices. And so if you're interested in more information about the Futures Group work, here's a link to it on our webpage. And here's my contact information. I'm always happy to further discuss Choices and Voices or any of our scenario planning efforts. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I'm going to pass it over to Greg now.
Okay, thanks very much, Brad. I sure appreciate the background on your program, and that was a perfect transition, mentioning futures and scenario planning as people are considering land use issues in concert with transportation changes, and certainly the least among those are new modes and new ways to use different modes. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about a little bit today, is real-time ride sharing. And I want to distinguish the flavor of real-time ride sharing that I'm using in this research project as being centered on carpooling. This is not a for-profit venture that a lot of people are used to hearing the word Uber may relate to, as competing with taxis. this system is limited in terms of how drivers are reimbursed to not exceed the value of their trip. And so that firmly fits within the definition in our federal guidance on what real-time ride sharing is. But I'll offer, this is the question that's considered in the research project that we're working with right now, is how can we encourage ride sharing to increase? Particularly, can we use toll discounts to encourage carpooling? And so this research project that I'm going to walk through takes a look at this question particularly. Just as an overview, I'll offer a little bit of background on real-time ride sharing and more information about this specific project, and give you a glimpse into our results, although noticing that it's an ongoing project and the results are not yet vetted by the sponsors, and we're going to continue to have more information come out as this project continues. So first of all, real-time ride sharing, which is also called dynamic ride sharing, is most often uses a smartphone application to match carpool riders whenever it is that they want. So you can do it in theory immediately, or you can schedule it at a specific time using a smartphone, or in some cases a web application. So this is contrasted from traditional carpooling coordination, where most of our regions already have a database that connects people that live and work nearby each other to try to match them for carpools. Of course, that works pretty well for a standard commute, but in some regions a commute can constitute a pretty small fraction of the total amount of traffic. And so this provides an option for people to truly be able to use carpooling as an option for all their trips, not just for regular commutes. Of course, the enabling technologies is the story of the smartphone. Along with our smartphone technologies, we're wrapping up cell phone-based internet with a global positioning system identifying exactly where that unit is. Of course, you have a unique identification that goes along with that smartphone login to a specific application. And then, of course, electronic walleting is actually a significant benefit research is showing, rather than have people try to share the costs by either alternating drivers or sharing cash. This makes that easier. And of course, all the data is kept online on cloud-based servers. So all these things are pretty individual pieces, but when you add them all together, we're talking about a significant opportunity in improving not new transportation modes, but improving communication that facilitates an existing transportation mode. So with all this discussion about smartphones, it's a valid question to consider whether the ownership of smartphones is a barrier for access to this. And of course, that's certainly true, and the data that I've got on the right from the Pew Research Center indicates particularly that those in older demographics and also low-income folks don't have smartphones at the same rate as with other populations. So it's something to consider for sure. However, these numbers are continuing to increase in terms of the availability of smartphone technology with internet to facilitate this type of use. The idea that I'm going to talk to you about today is how can we use real-time ride sharing to increase the throughput of our existing transportation system, particularly in managed lanes and tollways, by identifying how many people are in a car using the digital signature, as opposed to having to develop new infrastructure or have police visually identifying carpools through windshield surveying. The idea behind this is that in theory we could potentially decrease congestion on an entire system if we could encourage carpooling at a large scale. And of course, if that happens, then you can realize infrastructure cost savings by deferring expansions of roadways and reduce maintenance. However, all of these different ideas are contingent on whether or not real-time ride sharing really takes off. And so that's why this experiment looks particularly at providing discounts for toll roads for these carpools that can be verified digitally. So in general, where does real-time or dynamic ride-sharing sit in terms of our motorized transportation modes? I'm positioning it in this slide in the middle, frankly, where we have a lot of the really low-cost potential of trips comparable to mass transit, while offering more flexibility in schedule as compared to mass transit, and of course, drastically increasing the utilization of the existing roadways compared to standard occupancy rates. And for many of our regions, we have, if you look at American Community Survey data, about 10 to 11% of people regularly carpool on their way to work. So that number is pretty low, and of course, more people share rides for other types of trips. But at peak period is the time, people are commuting that can most directly affect the times that most regions experience the worst congestion. And some back of the envelope calculations here in the Austin region indicate that within the city, there are likely 900,000 empty seats taking 2 trips every day. And within our region, we've got at least 2 million empty seats traveling every day. And of course, that doesn't mean that every seat can be fully occupied easily. Carpooling doesn't work out for every person, for every schedule. But to the extent that technology can facilitate it, we could realize benefits that could affect transportation planning in the future and perhaps our operation of our systems currently. So a few of the challenges to this entire system are significant, and I wanted to mention, is that this doesn't dismiss the challenge of coordinating with others to be able to share a ride. Whether you're a driver or a rider, you've still got to do at least a little bit of planning and get involved to be able to share the trip. Smartphones can be tied to individual identities and almost always involve having a photograph and some information about the drivers and riders that may be joining you, but that doesn't make everybody feel comfortable with it. This notion of stranger danger is something that is real, but it can also be mitigated by including more information on smartphone applications about the individuals that could be involved, but also by facilitating use and growth with employer networks and local neighborhoods where people already have some sense of trust between each other, whether that concern is real or just imagined. And then, of course, I mentioned the marginal economy of driving and the cost investments that encourage continued driving alone. Car ownership has increased drastically in the last 20 years, especially in the United States, and so auto availability is principally at an all-time high. At the same time, towards the end of 2014, we had a almost historic low cost in terms of gas, and so those are some real economic effects that keep people from seeking out ride-sharing as a solution for trips. Real quickly, the existing research that influenced the way that we're doing this study and how you might consider the future of carpooling and opportunities for increasing ride utilization in your own regions include that first of all, whenever you have pricing involved for roads via tolling or parking on either end of the trip, increases the prospects for people sharing rides. So that's a symbiotic relationship to include pricing in policy. And then in situations like with high occupancy vehicle lanes that required 3 occupants, that is 1 driver and 2 riders, then that tends to increase people's perceptions of trust and potential utilization of the system. So in other words, people are more comfortable getting to a car that already has 2 other people as opposed to just 1 other person. And then regardless of the real-time or dynamic nature of the technology, people still prefer generally to schedule rides at least the night before rather than just immediately. Of course, having that flexibility is only going to be a benefit. And then the last study found that targeting large employers can be a real win-win to increase the capacity and utilization of carpooling programs. And so that's what the project that I'll describe started off with. Originally was marketing to large employers. But let me explain this concept of tolling integration. First of all, this notion is that we have a significant amount of single occupant drivers, and we're able to combine them together using nothing more than a software solution. Then theoretically everybody wins. Everybody's going to save. As I mentioned, at least 10%, if not more in many regions, or just a little bit more, are actually carpooling for most trips. So we have a great deal of single occupancy vehicle trips going right now. The pricing benefit in this study that we're piloting in Austin right now is to encourage carpooling with toll road discounts, where if you have two people in the car that is only one rider, you get half off on the toll if you take a toll road on the trip, or if you have two riders in the car with a driver, then the toll is fully reimbursed. So again, this notion is that we're providing mobility with software as opposed to construction projects. And so this can be a complement to a lot of other mobility solutions. Here's another way to sort of visualize what's going on from the user's perspective on the left, where you're using Karma, and that happens to be the brand of app that we're using in this particular study. CARMA is scheduling a pickup, and then they're driving along with their driver and rider on a toll road, such as the 183A toll road was the first one that we used in the Austin region, and having a toll transaction that gets recorded, and then of course the rider is dropped off. We have a back office operation that connects that Karma database along with the toll road authorities database in order to be able to issue toll reimbursements to those individual drivers. So to acquaint you with our region just a little bit, that 183 toll road that I mentioned is at the northern end, or the top end of the map. And then we also added the Manor Expressway, that's also called 290, which is on the northeast side, or on the east side of this map, the northeast side of the Austin area inside Texas. Both of those corridors are relatively low in population. They're mostly suburban routes, and much of the area is in fact still rural in nature. And that's consistent with the opportunities that we've seen looking at the data in our region and others, where carpooling is especially attractive to people that are taking longer trips because you realize more cost savings by sharing the ride. So it's offer lower cost mobility in places that are less cost effective to be served through transit. So let me share a few of the results that we've had to date. I'll remind you that those results are still ongoing. These are results of weekly passenger trips over the year within the year 2014, and we started with a beta soft launch just before the year started, so we had a trickle of use, and then we had a major launch in late February along with a press event, and we saw a huge bump in the weekly passenger trips within this region that you see on the graph there. We've followed up with more outreach that tied along with the opening of the Manor Expressway. That's a new toll road that opened during the course of this research project, and we saw a pretty significant bump after that. Again, Karma released a brand new version and conducted a whole lot more press to try to tell people about this toll road discount process that was facilitated by real-time ride sharing. And then we got great news with an expansion of this project off of just CTRMA's two toll roads in the region, or those two main toll roads, into the remainder of the toll facilities that are operated by the Texas Department of Transportation. We also had a reminder that people could cash out their accounts for those that were driving and accruing the value in their accounts that were offered by riders. And the specifics of that are that it's for a trip it's on the order of I think 20 cents per mile for each rider. Okay, and that's limited to the IRS reimbursable amount for a driver. So they can't actually make money, but they can cover the cost of the trip. So that's a real opportunity through the walleting function available in that app. So here's a glance at where they traveled in the region. And of course, you had people using these trips all over our region, sometimes tied with toll roads and sometimes not. And of course, we're only looking at straight line routes. I don't have the data on their actual route choices, but we have origins and destinations of the ride-sharing trips. And those generally do follow those 2 toll roads that were involved in this study, the 183A route up north and 290, also called the Manor Expressway, out east. And this is a graph that shows 2 different variables. On the left side, you'll see that's the bar data. That's the total CTRMA toll transaction, and we see following along with the opening of the Manor Expressway, likely, last spring. But we had an even faster growth, although the total numbers are still quite a trickle in terms of the actual user trips using the Karma real-time ride-sharing system. So it is growing faster, but it's still just a trickle in terms of the total amount of traffic that's occurring on the tollways. So in summary, from the system user's perspective, individuals on average saved over $1 per trip in tolls alone. So that's a significant savings that people can realize using this system. But I will note that during 2014, we also had a drop in fuel prices that, depending on the fuel efficiency of your vehicle, could amount to almost the same value. So that mitigated, I think, the use of the system in this particular time frame, although again it's ongoing. We did find that this real-time ride-sharing system is effective fundamentally, that it's connecting people that live nearby each other and perhaps work near each other as well. So the system is effective. And we also did surveying and found that people really appreciated this notion of toll discounts for people that were carpooling. Now, from the agency perspective, first of all, we did confirm that you can use this system to verify vehicle occupancy. So that has implications for how toll road operators might be able to use this for occupancy in the future. It is potentially an option. And we did find that the vehicle occupancy among the users was greatly increased through real-time ride sharing in this study. And I also believe that fostering carpooling and discounts can be of interest in terms of social equity, but as of right now, we're not seeing the data that would point to showing that we've really been able to provide a lower cost option that'll extend to large low-income populations. But as this project scales up, that needs to be studied more. And speaking of which, I think the equity impacts are something that we need to focus on in the future. Also consider how real-time ride sharing can be used to access transit as a feeder mode, and different ways we can explore to encourage carpooling through promoting it with individual employers and transportation agencies. It'd also be interesting to look at the effects of parking charges and perhaps more importantly, see how we can work on the potential barriers to people that aren't using the system, because we can only learn so much from people that are actually getting involved. So there's other angles we need to take a look at this. There's the references, and again, these will be posted on our the website if you wanted to take a look in more detail and learn more about it. And I think we're going to open it up to the entire group for questions next. And so I'll see if I can end here and see if Ben is ready to coordinate other questions from the audience.
I am, and these are 3 great presentations. And Greg, I'm happy to see that you're in the back seat in that picture. That's awesome. We have a few questions from our audience, but I'd actually like to start out with a couple of questions myself. I've been furiously writing down notes, and I want to go back to Brandon. Blindness is really a low incidence disability. As you pointed out, roughly 1% of the population is blind. So I wonder what difficulty do you face generally educating public officials about the need for the types of expenditures that are associated with things like click and go?
Well, that's a major issue with blind tech, period. There was a recent article that I was quoted in talking about people developing robots to guide people in a metro station. That type of expense no one is ever going to fund. So with Click and Go, and what we're trying to do is not just develop a system for people who are blind and visually impaired. That will be the base, and it will be the most detailed information, but you will be able to scale up to where you can cover other parts of the population, because 1% of the population is visually impaired or blind. That number is going to be increasing dramatically with the aging population, but 12 to 15% of the entire population has some form of disability that may be able to benefit from a system like this, depending on how the information is provided. So a flexible system like Click and Go allows you to reach out to other sections of the population. And we've even actually found there's a lot of interest from the tourism and restaurant industry with this service, not just focusing on disability, but providing information in a different way that's non-visual. So anything that's just going to be for the blind, we have people who come in all the time and are very skeptical of any type of blindness products because over 78% of the population of the blind population is unemployed. They don't have money in their pockets to pay for expensive technology. So they have to depend on state resources like vocational rehabilitation to provide services. So even with Click and Go, you don't have to have a smartphone to use it. Yes, that's one option to use the app, but you can receive it through just a regular phone. You can print it off the internet. Most people have access to that, even if they go to the library now to get that information, or a note-taking device. So it's just a very flexible system, and that's why we like it so much.
That's great. And I think you described the idea of having robots escorting people around metro stations. One thing I've experienced too is that people with disabilities don't want to be stigmatized. They don't want to have the obvious sign that they have a disability unless they're using, for example, a white cane as a signal, to give a wider berth.
Well, and it's hard enough for people to carry even a white cane. There's a lot of adjustment to that. So if you have a robot walking you around, I mean, yeah, that creates a little bit more. It'll be cool for a little while. But yeah, this allows people to, this system does not teach people to travel. It's just giving them information. So as long as someone is, if they're provided appropriate training, and if they have this type of system, then they're going to be able to travel independently. And no one's even going to know what type of system they're using. And it's not specifically for disability. It will be, across all parts of society.
Okay, so we have a question for Brett, and this is from Justin. Were there any interactive mapping tools as part of Choices and Voices, or are any of the mapping outputs available for download?
That's a really good question. We did actually, the maps that are on Choices and Voices, we have been intending to draw in GIS. Right now, they actually were just drawn in using Adobe, just using it, I forget the Adobe drawing program. So we need to create the GIS version of the map, and I think at that point will allow us to have more interactive mapping. So right now what's in there is really just an image file, and it just changes out as land use patterns change. I think our bigger vision has been to have some of the new transportation facilities as they're being built, have them show up in the map in the top right-hand corner, and use that map in more interactive fashion. But so far we haven't managed to get that incorporated.
Okay, and for Greg, and this is actually stemming from a similar question I had. This is from Michael. Have you had problems with people trying to game the system? Example, a single person bringing 2 smartphones in their SOV in order to achieve a half-off toll, since the tool measures smartphones and doesn't actually measure the number of people.
Yeah, that's one of the next phases that we want to to look at is that, and frankly, I think that's going to be hard to measure in reality, and it's also going to be hard to measure in the study. But depending on what you wanted to use this potential application for, it could be very important. So if you wanted to use this not just in a pilot, situation, but truly scale it up, then I think you'd have to develop methods that were, based on analytics that observed people's use patterns and look for anomalies similar to other auditing techniques. So that might be one of the directions that will be looked at in the future.
That's fascinating. Along similar lines, my question was relative to privacy concerns. So in my state, we've had open road tolling for several years, and on our toll roads, some of our toll roads anyway. And so we use E-ZPass, but there are certain members of our state legislature whom I won't call them rabid, that would be pejorative and disrespectful, but they are vigilant about privacy. And so we have legislation that prohibits the state police from using the E-ZPass data to determine vehicle speed. And I can imagine the political arguments that would go on about body counts in vehicles. Have you faced these questions?
We haven't in this study, and that's part of why we had a survey that asked people about their experiences, with some open-ended questions. And that's not something that came up. Of course, since this is a pilot study, people are having to go through our institutional review board process, and they know that I'm a point person that's responsible for safe use of their data. And so what we're doing in this particular pilot study may not be exactly what you'd experience if you were to roll this out large scale outside of a study context. I think people that are involved in it have a sense of trust with the system because it's part of a study associated with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. So I think there's some trust building that would need to occur, and that's going to occur over time. And again, I think you alluded to the point that it depends on who you talk to in terms of how concerned people are regarding the trust of data, but it's going to be upon our transportation agencies to demonstrate a level of trust if they're going to be able to exercise use of these kind of tools in the future. And to the extent that agencies demonstrate responsible use of the data and not sharing it when it's not supposed to, in ways that it's not supposed to be used, then I think that's going to facilitate being able to use technology like this. But it always needs to be couched with those real world concerns in mind.
Right. Okay, going back to Brett, a question from Bill. What ways is DVRPC considering to increase and broaden participation in its online survey tools?
Well, I think actually, so our current effort by working with a larger group has helped to build interest in the tool itself as well as the scenario planning process. We tried to engage academics and leaders of related organizations, but people that were really outside of our typical stakeholder group. And so bringing new people into our scenario planning process, I think helps make more people aware of it around the region. Particularly people who I think can help to spread word about it. Internally, I think we've talked about that. Maybe it's at times been buried. We usually release a new scenario report and an update to choices and voices at the same time. And sometimes I think the scenario report winds up getting more of the attention, and choices and voices kind of unfortunately falls into the background. So we keep thinking about it. I think right now we're really focused on the next round, the next scenario planning piece. But I think we also are thinking a lot about what else can we do. We've expanded our social media presence. It's only been 6 or so months, I think, that DVRPC's had a Facebook page. So we are, as an agency, starting to embrace social media at a much larger scale than we had in the past. So hopefully continued growth in our social media presence will help us spread the word about the tool as well. So Bill, if you got any ideas for us beyond that, we'll take them.
Oh, great. And there's your email address. So Greg, a couple of karma-related questions. First, did you say karma works by both driver and passengers entering their trips in the app, so both persons need the app on their phones?
Yes. Yeah, I think they've upgraded it several different times, and so there's a few different options that have been available during the course of the study, but I think that's the current status of it, so that you do need to have um, two smartphones or devices that have that ability.
And next question is, has a minimum population density threshold been identified for practical use of karma carpooling? And if so, what is it?
That's, I think, something that we're headed to in this study. Um, I think all ride matching databases, for those that have worked with this, for instance, at metropolitan planning organizations where I used to work, are dependent on that kind of critical threshold to have enough people to use it. Right now is a strange time in this field because the doors have been blown off, so to speak, with even defining what ride sharing is with all these new technologies that are coming out. That's great in terms of innovation, but it's also confusing to the consumer. And so we have a lot of splintered use of different systems. You might have a transit agency that operates a ride matching or van pooling system. You might have a MPO that's encouraging it, and transportation management agencies or associations. And then also, of course, the private sector now is innovating quite a bit with different options. And so these, if I had to guess, going forward, are going to start to coalesce. You're going to have some winners and losers, and that's when we're going to start seeing that critical mass actually occur. Right now, even though the technology has been available for a few years, I think we're still at the beginning cusp of that, and it's going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of consolidation, and was alluded to earlier, a little bit of a gain in a sense of trust in the system to make it something that really catches on. And for those that are paying attention to the buzz associated sometimes with the millennial generation, it appears that a lot of the barriers that many of us consider may be mitigated in the future, but it's going to take a certain amount of time. But I do hope to be able to publish more out of this that demonstrates some of the effects of what the population of users, how that affects utilization. So in general, the more people you can get as drivers, the more riders you're likely to get, the more successful the system will be.
Well, I think that generational shift is really important to recognize, because I look at my stepson who lives just outside of Boston, and he's a driver for Lyft, which is an Uber competitor, and makes actually quite a bit of money doing that on the weekends. To the extent that the younger generations are going to have vehicles, we may find that they're using them in different ways than an older generation, and I put myself in that, has and is accustomed to and is comfortable with.
And I would offer too that there's some merging going on in technologies already, but not just merging in terms of software that we're seeing, but also hardware with connected vehicle and automated vehicle projections are likely to rethink the way that we consider automobility at all. And for instance, in terms of, right now, the use of Uber is considered by many to be extremely similar to a regular taxi, except facilitated by software. If that driver is no longer needed, then we're looking at something that's behaving a little bit more like privatized transit. So I think if I could offer any indications for the future in thinking about how these systems might work, is that we're going to see not a splintering of different options out there, but perhaps a gradient of different vehicle sizes and opportunities will grow in this whole area that's likely to change transportation over the next few years. So it's something that is, I think, important and valuable for planners to consider.
Okay, question for Brett. Has any consideration been given to cross-validating the choices and voices results with traditional public opinion polling? And actually, I had an associated question, and noting that you said that only 5% of your respondents said no new taxes, the rest of them, 95%, suggesting something else then. My question was, how representative is it of the overall population?
Yeah, I think actually just the responses that we've gotten, I think gives you a pretty good indication of how representative it is of the overall population. And we've never taken this tool as something as a scientifically validated response or opinion pool. And I think if we were to do that in the region, certainly we would get very different responses. And so we've always been cognizant of that, in how we analyze the results and how we think about it. And certainly, as we're developing a long-range plan, we always recognize that choices and voices is just one of many areas that we're taking and building the plan off of. So it's certainly not the only tool. I think the last time we did a public opinion poll was probably 10 years ago, and I'm not sure that we even asked about new taxes at that point in time. So I'm not sure that we have a representative sample to compare it with in that case. So I think it is certainly a self-selecting set of people who will go online and take this, and they're the people who already have some sort of interest in planning, some sort of interest in being public participation in kind of what kind of community you'd like to have, and I think that does obviously skew the results compared to what you would have from a wider, more representative sample.
Okay, and for Greg, we've got a couple of interesting questions from Lee. Could this app be used also for ride sharing outside of work, such as to downtown areas? And kind of a secondary question, could it be used for ride sharing on, and this is a great question, weekend nights among younger populations, which is in need of a designated driver?
Yeah, I think both of the issues are a real opportunity in this, and I think it relates back to the previous question on critical mass. I think the commute trip is seen by many as a first and primary one to deal with congestion and traffic issues, but if people are willing and able to switch their commute trip, which is often considered the one that you can't give up or change very much, then people would be more willing to be able to use it for other trips. So we've definitely seen in the data that people are using the system for trips that are not, or very likely not, regular commutes. So it's already effective in that manner, and this system works anywhere in the world, I believe, already. And so you can all experiment with it. Of course, it's going to be, you're more likely to have a particular driver or rider if you're in some of the cities where it's already been launched, and that includes Bergen, Norway, and San Francisco, California, and of course Austin, Texas. But anybody, any group of friends that wanted to try it out can certainly do it right now.
Great. I have a question now for Brandon, and this gets to the nature of the technology that's in use, and I think reflects that a common misperception that a lot of sighted people have imagined that people who are blind all read Braille, and many blind people don't. And especially as our population ages and we are in our later years acquiring a vision disability, we're less likely to be using Braille. But we have this group of people who is now growing up with the use of smartphones and displacing, as the older generation dies, those who are less comfortable with and less adept at using smartphones. What do you see as the future of technology with a population that can't see where they're going?
Well, the first thing on the Braille comment, the later the onset of vision loss, the least likelihood there is of you even learning Braille. So, if someone is 70 years old and loses their vision, they're going to want their books, use audio books and receive information auditorially. So the younger you are, there's a higher likelihood that you're going to learn Braille and the use of it, because you can actually accomplish a lot more and communicate a lot easier if you do know Braille, and it's much more efficient instead of doing everything auditorially. But ultimately, we now live in an individualized society where we do what we want to, we receive information the way that we want to, we travel the way that we want to, and this all follows the same path. That's why a system similar to what we're using with Click and Go, it's accessible in many different formats, from auditory to text so that someone can receive it in Braille, to the point of just calling up on your phone. And the older population, they may not be using smartphones. More of them are now. And actually, a lot of the independent living programs for older people are starting to teach the use of, like iPads and stuff like that. But they'll be able to use, they will always need access to more basic information, whether they are, printing it from a computer, receiving it in the mail, or just calling on, a basic cell phone, which most people are using now. But the younger population, it's all going to be smartphone based, and the cheaper those products become, the more accessible it's going to be to the broader population. But it has to be a flexible system. It has to be a system that has different options. It can't be a one size fits all.
Great, thank you. So, Brad, I have a question for you. This is from Gloria, and kind of reflects some of the things that Greg was talking about in social equity, at least if I'm reading the question correctly. And she asks, curious about any focused efforts for EJ populations, and I assume that's environmental justice, only by DVRPC for the Choices and Voices initiative.
Another really great question. So one of the things we tried to do with Choices and Voices, and I wouldn't say it's been a smashing success, but whenever we've set up a table somewhere, the panel at an event, we've tried to take a laptop with us and set up, and we have Choices and Voices available for people who are there to take, to take it. Haven't had a whole lot of people do it that way, but we've tried to bring it out that way. I would say that the current scenario planning effort, again, we have an environmental justice working group that we've involved into this development of this effort. As part of that, we've talked about Choices and Voices with them. We've made them aware of it. In a lot of cases, the people who are serving on the EJ working group are representatives of larger environmental justice organizations and agencies, and so that's I think helped spread the word to those groups as well. And the current effort again, has attempted to bring in more and more non-traditional stakeholders, including people from environmental justice communities.
Okay, thanks. Going back to Brandon, and this is probably not totally tongue-in-cheek, from a question from Diane. Why should people trust the beacons will be working, given Washington's bad rap for keeping its elevators working? And I've certainly experienced that with escalators in the metro.
Yeah, I have the same question about the elevators and escalators. So the beacons have not been deployed yet, but we will be implementing a maintenance schedule, ensuring that the beacons are all working and operational. And Click and Go and CLB will be working together to ensure that continues. It will not be Metro solely who would be replacing batteries, testing to make sure that all the beacons are there. We're not planning to completely overwhelm the system with beacons. It's not going to be a large number in each station. It's only going to be major landmarks, because you can really overwhelm someone with information. But no, it will not be based on the typical maintenance that we see from WMATA, with the overwhelming situations that they've run into with elevators and escalators.
That would be quite a relief, actually.
Yeah, and they're actually they're still working with the beacon usage, to where hopefully the beacons will send a message to the developer that there's either an issue with the beacon or that the battery life is going low. I believe that those capabilities are going to be available. And then there's also been some work that some research being conducted on automation of these maps and narratives using beacons, and it's really exciting stuff that they're working on.
Brett, question from John. Is documentation on the scenario planning model available?
So on the GitHub website, there's a Excel file that has the full program. I do have documentation from the first version, a report that was written when we created the first version. It's not going to quite match up with what's on the tool right now, but you have my email address, John, so feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in the report on the first version. I'm happy to send it over to you.
Great, thank you. And a similar question from Eric. He's asking for the release dates for the different versions, because he says to give me a better context of the various quality or quantity of feedback of the 3 versions, what were the release dates for them?
So October 2012, version 1.0, October 2013, version 2.0, May 2014, version 2.1.
Okay, thank you.
Is that what I assume that's what he's looking for? I will say version 2.0, there was a kind of a flurried debate about leading up to Act 89. It looked like it was not going to pass. We were kind of hustling to get version 2.0 out there. About a week before Act 89 passed, we got version 2.0 released. And once Act 89 passed, we left version 2.0 up, but we really didn't advertise it at all. We didn't really push 2.0. It really, within a week of being released, was an obsolete tool.
Okay, and we are at this point out of time. So I want to thank our 3 speakers, Brandon Cox, Brett Fusco, and Greg Griffin, and for the Transportation Planning Division of APA for sponsoring today's session, Technology Applications for Transportation Planning. You can log your credits for CM by going to the APA website, planning.org, and searching for the event 30331. And remember to go to the Ohio Planning website for news on upcoming webcasts and to like us on Facebook. Thanks very much, everyone.